Okay, I think we'll get started. I know the mayor is, I understand he's running a few minutes behind, which is to be expected, I suppose. My name is Tim Nickerson. I am the moderator for this event. I'm also a former alderman in Nashua, having served 20 years ago now. Seems like it was yesterday, but the gray hairs remind me it is in my head, remind me it is not. um, so I'm by far not a literary expert or anything of that sort, but certainly uh, we'll be leading this discussion, and we have with us Nicole and Liz, which I'll allow both of you to introduce yourself briefly, and we'll proceed from there. So.
Hi, so I'm Nicole Loring. I am the assistant professor of political science at Rivier University, and I teach classes about political transitions and elections and women in politics and lots of classes like that.
Hi, and I'm Liz Fontanella. I teach at Nashua Community College. I teach a variety of courses in film and writing and also political science. I am also the director and the creator of a small theater group in Pelham, New Hampshire.
Wonderful.
So welcome everyone, by the way.
Absolutely.
So glad to see you all.
Yeah. And I know a few more people that have been signed up, so we may see them coming in as we go along. So certainly, I think this is my first time participating in one of these, but I'm sure we can certainly say it's probably rather informal, so we won't kind of follow any strict rules or anything of that sort. So I think to start it off, I think there's my notes on this book and play are far more than what we can cover during this one session. So I'll pick a few things that I think are kind of some overriding themes, and I'm sure we'll probably veer off course every now and then, which is certainly well within our prerogative. But I think overall, kind of this, from my perspective, and I'll then kind of throw this to Liz and Nicole, and then we'll kind of have others join in if they want. But my thinking is that this is primarily kind of the main part of it is that it's really a gay white man's kind of coming out story as kind of a whole thing. There's no main characters that are people of color. There are no main characters that are women other than Harper and on a kind of tangential level Hannah or the angel or things of that sort. So it's primarily a gay man's kind of coming out story back in the 1980s and 90s, which may be a little different than what would take place today. So kind of throw that to you, actually, as we have the mayor joining us. We'll maybe put a pin in that. And Mayor, I believe you're on mute at the moment, so you might just need to unmute and then we can go from there.
So I apologize for being late. I got held up, but I knew Tim would do a really good job. So have the panelists introduced themselves?
We just started that. Yes, we just finished that. Mm-hmm.
All right, good. Well then, Tim's the moderator. This is a great work of art and a great play, I think. Mm-hmm. I recommend to anyone that you see the TV version from about 20 years ago, which includes Meryl Streep as Hannah, Al Pacino as Roy Cohn, and Mary Louise Parker as Harper. But that was my first introduction. Anyway, Tim used to be Ward 4 alderman, right? Two. And we're trying to get him to come back to Nashua, so that's why we put him on as this moderator. So we've got our fingers crossed.
Well, thanks.
Anyway, take it away.
Okay, very good. So getting back certainly kind of the gay man's kind of coming out story, and we'll let to Nicole and Liz and see what your thoughts are around that to start off with.
Yeah, I would agree definitely with your assessment that this is a very white man focused story. There's not a whole lot of intersectionality that we might see if this had been updated or if it was written in 2021. And a few other things that I also jotted down as things that really struck me were the focus on religion, but I did think it was interesting that the specific religions that were focused on were Judaism and Mormonism. When I saw the title Angels in America, it wasn't necessarily the religions that I would have expected would have played a large role. So I did think that that was really interesting. A big theme throughout the play is betrayal, and a number of characters betray each other, perhaps betray themselves in a way. Obviously, politics plays a huge role with Reaganism and the role that the Reagan administration played during the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And then hypocrisy with different characters sort of not living their maybe their truth in varied ways. And then the final theme that I jotted down was, of course, race, because it's largely absent in the play, but it does come up. And when it comes up, it's in a very, it's almost all white characters speaking to the sole Black character. Occasionally, Belize has things to say, but oftentimes he's listening more than speaking.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that particular point. I mean, Belize, in a lot of ways, his character, and maybe it is because he is the one, character of color, he's concerned more with the day-to-day realities of the human experience rather than the more lofty political rhetoric. And that probably in many ways is going to mirror his own experience. And as Nicole just said, the idea that in a lot of ways he functions as someone that everyone else comes to, and he is interpreting, their dreams and their hallucinations. And they go to him to help sort of put into perspective what it is that they're seeing. And he talks with all of them. As Nicole also pointed out, there's the idea that there are Jewish characters and Mormon characters, and they get to converse with each other. But the lone, Black character does not get to do that. He doesn't have another Black character to sort of, bounce things off and talk about the realities of what his day-to-day life is. So I think that the play, obviously it's a masterpiece. It's an 8-hour play for those of you who may have never seen it. It was revived on Broadway, I believe in 2017 or 2018. Yeah, and they broke it into 2 different parts. So you would go for the first 4 hours, you would go and see part of it, and then the next night you would come back and see the second 4 hours. So it's probably easier, as the mayor pointed out, to watch it as a film production. But it is interesting.
I did go to that Broadway production.
To see, and spectacularly, the set pieces are spectacular, and the whole the Broadway. And if it does come back to Broadway, perhaps we can go on a field trip. That would be fun, right? But the other thing that is brought out here too is that there are not a lot of women in the play. And one of the women in particular, Harper, I just want to touch on her very briefly, and then I'll turn it over to whoever wants to sort of continue this thought. But she has a lot of hallucinations throughout the play, and it's brought on by her use of Valium. But because of the way the play is written, those hallucinations, they don't take her out of reality in a lot of ways. They actually give her a method, a way to sort of look at how humanity actually is operating in this Reagan era. So it's interesting that, she's portrayed as this person who's not really, in touch with the reality because of her hallucinations, but yet those hallucinations allow her to see a different viewpoint that is not seen by some of the other characters who are portrayed as people who are much more, down to earth.
Mm-hmm.
Back to Belize, he is like practically a saint. I mean, in the sense that he's taking care of Roy Cohn, who treats him, says really, really bad things to him. And rather than just walk out on him, he continues. I mean, he doesn't like Roy Cohn, but he continues to care for Roy. And, Belize also is kind of mistreated by Lewis to some degree, or at least, Lewis is rather insensitive towards him. And, he's he's good to Lewis as well. So he just is a character who is willing to, you know, he's very compassionate and just is almost like a saintly character.
Yeah, and I think that's the one person in this whole production that I think if there's kind of as the kind of the model character in any way is kind of Belize, thinking that that's one character that can someone that actually put aside their personal feelings, their political feelings, and tendencies, and cared for someone that they don't wouldn't have anything to do with otherwise, other than this is someone that's under his care. Um, so I think that's really kind of a pretty remarkable character to have in there, which is a lot of times, sometimes not the way that people of color were represented in a lot of productions or literatures. That's kind of the ideal character in many ways, which I think was kind of refreshing in some ways.
Belize's
almost
use
like a
of language
magical.
is also so creative. He is Belize is just just a font of different ways of expressing things that are just creative and really refreshing.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that, like, as we're speaking about this, I'm thinking about Tim's opening remarks about how this is a white man's coming out story. I'm almost starting to think of the characters as like on two different teams, that you have like Lewis and Pryor and Roy and Joe on one hand, and then you have Belize and Hannah, the angel Harper on the other. And the more feminine leaning characters are sort of mystical or are like vessels for the other characters, sort of the main characters, to speak through or to speak past in a way. Mm-hmm. And that the women or the femme characters seem to have some sort of like magical, mystical aspect to them where they're almost not real, like they're almost sort of incorporeal.
So what about Lewis as a character? Not a really good guy in the end, to say the least. He talks a lot, but
that I think is a bit of an understatement.
I think he struggled though. I think that although his actions, particularly early on, when he does leave his sick boyfriend, obviously it's despicable. But on the other hand, I think he was callous in a way, but I think he was also struggling with what to do. I think he was afraid for his own humanity. I think in a lot of ways, the fact that he did walk away and then he tried to come back does give him, there's an element there where you can say that's a very human reaction. His first reaction is I have to get out of here. I have to think about trying to save myself. And he goes on and he does, hangs out with Joe and does all these things that are not something that you would think of as positive. But then in the end, he does begin to rethink things. And I think that we can all sort of relate to the fact that, as part of our humanity, we make mistakes. And I think that was part of his journey, and the way that it's described, I think he kind of nails him as a figure that we've probably all met, and that we hope we are not.
What do you think his experience with his grandmother, and having kind of not seen her for 10 years once she went into that retirement home and then just kind of appeared at her funeral? How do you think that, to me, that seems that was more kind of as one of the lessons that he learned, and then he applied kind of a little bit of growth in dealing with Pryor. But certainly that was probably a little too late to learn the lesson. But certainly I think his experience with his grandmother was kind of one of the things that helped teach him a little bit. So.
Of course, with Pryor, when he seeks to come back to Pryor, of course, it's sort of a little too a little too late in a way. I mean, now Pryor is recovering now and potentially on his way to health. And now Lewis wants to come back, and Pryor, despite the fact that he loves Lewis, just he's not going to allow that, which you have to respect.
Yeah, I think that Lewis does experience growth. I think the other character that also experiences some growth is Hannah.
Exactly.
It's because she's a Mormon. She's looking at her son and thinking, I cannot accept this. But yet at the end, spoiler alert, she's still there 5 years later. And so, you think she has to have grown. She has to have, that creative side of her that allowed her to sort of see a bigger picture, I think also allowed her to grow.
I mean, she couldn't even accept someone smoking on her terrace when we first met her. But then to go to the point of actually being able to sit with someone and care for someone who had HIV and AIDS was certainly, and then progressing all the way through, was certainly made some major growth.
I had bookmarked the page where her son tells her he's gay because the conversation is amazingly awkward and hilarious. She's like, just because your father didn't love you, you don't have to be so ridiculous about it. It's the most cringy. That's the worst possible way you could come out to someone. Like, that's the worst reaction.
That's the way some people have experienced coming out to family, which is just so traumatic.
Seriously.
I think Nicole brings up a really great point about the fact that we forget that there's a lot about this play that's funny. Yeah, it's very, there's so many layers to it, and there's a lot of it that's emotional and deep and spectacular. But I think we sometimes forget that there are some very, very funny lines. And
Hannah and Harper have some of the best one-liners. They're really funny.
Yeah.
Well, back to Hannah just for a minute. I love the last scene. 5 years later, they're by the fountain. They're really good friends now. I mean, they've really grown together. And despite the fact that they were much, much different earlier on, I mean, they've developed really close relationships, and they really enjoy being with each other. And Pryor, of course, really wants to continue to live, in part because he's so close to these people, including Hannah.
Right, and they've created a community, which is part of what the play is very much talking about. How we have to have community and understand each other. Those of us who are in different communities, we have to understand that there are differences and somehow grow as some of these characters were able to grow.
Yeah, I would even go beyond that and even call it more of as a family. And everyone, a lot of times people will not necessarily have connections with their blood relatives, but they'll have adopted another family. And I think that's what that end scene was kind of saying, is that these people have then kind of formed their own non-familial family, which I think is pretty common in many places, and especially in places where people happen to be gay or racial issues or religious, that they don't necessarily agree with their people they were brought up with. So
I think too, we're talking about the growth and the idea of family. Tim, I know when we originally talked about this, going back a few days earlier, one of the things that we were talking about is that when you're looking at this idea of the stories from these two white gay guys and their perspective, that if we did take, and the idea of community and family, that makes it relevant. But if we were to take it today, as you had pointed out, that today you would change it a bit, and you would have not so much, would be so centered on the idea of these two white, gay men. It would bring in other members of society, particularly we think about transgender youth and the issues that they are, grappling with, so that if it,
Mhm.
if it was updated, these are some of the things that would change. But the idea of community and family and how important that is, that wouldn't change. So,
And the support systems when you're facing adversity, which as Pryor pointed out, he had everyone that he knew had someone to help support them while they were going through some rough times. But certainly, Pryor was unfortunately the one person that didn't, except for maybe the angel in some ways. But I think this would certainly be a very different. I mean, this even though it was set in '85, it premiered on the stage in '93, I believe.
yes.
And I think this would be a vastly different story today, because in that time frame, certainly gay and HIV/AIDS were kind of so intertwined. Today, it's not so much. There's so many more medical advances. I think that um, that separation would be so far away right now. It'd be much more about the process and kind of so many more of the differences of the community, if you will, the LGBTQIA community, that would be brought up. And I think there probably would be some trans characters, and I think even that if it were today, I think probably Belize would probably be written as a trans character, someone who had gone from drag to ex-drag to maybe former ex-drag. And I think that written in '85, it might be more as a nod to possibly being a trans character today. So interested on kind of some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah,
I think the play does remind us, though, how horrible and scary the disease and the plague really was for people, because no one understood in the beginning where this came from and why it affected mostly the gay community, and also the level of denial regarding even the existence of this made their lives really difficult. And you wonder if the research and attention had been given earlier, whether maybe they could have made medical progress more quickly. But in the beginning, the disease, and the symptoms were just horrendous, So it was really a tough, and I do remember, when this was happening in New York City, and it was really bad.
Yeah, it was frightening, and the interestingly enough, if you think about the backdrop, Reagan's Morning in America, what the political backdrop was that was going on while this terrible disease was going on, and you can kind of juxtapose it to today and the political rhetoric that's thrown around today. It's an interesting look. It certainly serves to remind us of what was going on in that time frame. Obviously, as the mayor said, with the terrible AIDS epidemic, but the fact that Reagan wouldn't even talk about it, he wouldn't say it, and it was on his watch. He was not someone that was willing sort of to step forward and make it front and center and try and do something about it.
Right. To have the group that, at least to start, or at least visibly the most affected, to be a group of people that's very marginalized, meant that it was very easy to dismiss, or to be politically, for some politicians, to be fine with the idea that there was an epidemic going on. And thinking about that in the context of this past year, you heard sometimes almost similar language around dismissing that, like, only people over a certain age die. And it wasn't quite as horrific, the language being used about how people are expendable, as it was during HIV/AIDS. But there certainly were similarities, I thought, in terms of the way that if a particular demographic is being affected more than others, the people that are not members of that demographic may be a little easier to dismiss the problem, or to pretend that it's not as big of a deal as it really is, unfortunately.
In terms of the way things have changed, I think most of the characters, even even Hannah to some degree, just because of her religious beliefs and the like. They sort of felt like outcasts from society, that they weren't fully accepted, and that they were sort of in the shadows a bit. I mean, what would they think if you suggested to them then that there would be marriage equality, in a few decades or whatever? I think that they would have never, ever believed that that could happen.
Yeah, that I think many of us still sometimes are a little surprised that it actually has happened. But yeah, I think certainly there would be. I think there would be some pretty surprised individuals there. I think Belize, getting back to Belize, he has said in his discussion with Joe at the coffee shop a lot of things that are actually still happening today, which is really kind of interesting in some ways. And I think that actually has also come up in the past year, at least to the average person. There's been much more awareness of that. It's been happening for decades and decades, but certainly I think a lot of the racial issues that Belize had brought up and kind of his personal insights and personal experiences that not everyone was aware of was kind of even being mentioned in this piece back 30 years ago. So
yeah, and the horrific language that Roy Cohn threw at him when Belize was there, and was helping him, was in some ways was the magical nurse, cleaning up after him and taking care of him, and not reacting to the kind of language and the actions that Roy Cohn was known for.
And even giving it back to him and saying that, I've done hundreds and thousands of these IVs. I can make it feel like you're getting so easy, or I can make it feel horrible. I think he was saying something like,
Moreno.
Yeah, the veins, what have you. So he was giving it right back to him. He didn't have any care about this individual that certainly, if Roy wanted to, could certainly create some pretty significant problems for Belize. But Belize didn't care, which I give Belize a whole lot of credit for that.
Now, when Roy was really going down, I mean, very close to death, didn't Belize offer to sort of just get in the bed and kind of hold him or whatever? Didn't he offer that? I think he did.
I believe that you're right. I think that he did.
Incredible, but
that he would do that. He would do that.
That caring towards this guy.
Yeah.
And also, like, back in the 80s and 90s, especially early on when we didn't know very much about HIV/AIDS. I mean, people didn't want to touch.
No, people didn't know how
positive. You didn't want to use the same bathroom. Like, it was a huge deal when Princess Diana shook hands with someone who was in the hospital with AIDS. So yeah, for that gesture was especially meaningful, not just because of the intimacy of it, but also because of the fear around even touching someone who was positive at the time.
Yeah. Roy kind of got.
But in the end, when Roy went, Belize didn't, he didn't have any sentimental feelings towards the guy. He was, he got the AZT and got it to Pryor, and good, so he knew what he was dealing with, but he still was willing to reach out to that guy.
Yeah, definitely took advantage of everything that he had at that moment to further his own advances, to take advantage of it and make his kind of circle, his family whole and complete. And yeah. Another
very human reaction.
Yeah. And that, again, concerned with sort of the everyday reality of life. How do we move forward from here? Another, I think, an interesting use of a character too was how they wrote in Ethel Rosenberg, and how she just would sort of show up, and sometimes was the only person in the room with Roy. And I love the way that was sort of weaved in and out throughout the time that we were spending with Roy. I thought it was quite clever.
I forget. Is it the actress who plays Hannah who also plays Ethel?
I believe
they sort of double up the actors.
Everyone doubled up. I believe that's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And who was Ethel? Who
So
plays her?
Ethel and Hannah, I think, were so the
Oh,
mother, and Ethel Rosenberg, I believe.
Yeah. I believe those are the two. Yeah.
Yes, right. I remember that.
I love
Yeah,
that.
she was, and she took. Of course, she was executed purportedly because of Cone in large part for really, really not justified, but she might have been a spy or something, but harmless, really. And she did take some justified pleasure in Roy's demise.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say the because it is a Broadway stage play. If as you guys were reading it, I know Nicole, I think you made mention of this, but the set pieces and how it was, how it was styled, and just the spectacular nature of some of those set pieces, and parts when the angel came crashing in, when he first met, the Angel of America, and just the whole place just is destroyed. And Mayor got to see this spectacular piece of work on Broadway. I think maybe I was wondering if you could just touch a little bit on that for all of us, some of the more memorable moments from the actual play.
Well, they used a lot of light and sound to bring the angel into the scene, and of course, the angel comes from above, so the angel was suspended from above. So it was, worth seeing, no question about that. I would see it again. But what do you think about the angel? I mean, what is the angel all about?
The angel's really intense. Like, Tony Kushner really wanted this to be a scary angel. This is not like a soft, gentle kind of angel. This is a biblical angel.
Yeah, no messing around.
And no ignoring. You're gonna have to have a conversation with this angel. You can't just pretend it's a vision. It's no, this angel is there and in your face and has a lot to say.
And is Prior really a prophet?
And there are actually multiple angels, right? They do different angels for different continents. At some point, there's like a council of
angels. Right. There's a council
of angels. Yeah.
So is Prior really a prophet? And if so, of what? I'm not sure I ever really came to grips with that.
I don't know that he came to total grips with that. Yeah. I think he wondered himself. I think at moments he embraced it, right? He would wear the clothing, and he just, I have this to say. But I think there were other moments when he was wondering, is this just all in my mind because of my illness, because of the drugs? What is it? I don't know. I think that we're left to decide upon amongst ourselves whether he was or wasn't. I think it's very open-ended.
It's like he's chosen in a way. I mean, there were obviously people who lived, but there were a lot of people who died. Roy died, nasty, nasty death, and Prior made it. Maybe he was chosen in a certain way. Why, maybe the angel chose him for whatever reason, to live on and serve a good purpose.
Even though he said he did not want to be.
He wasn't really proclaiming anything. He wasn't really predicting anything.
Yeah. He didn't want the burden.
Right. Well, maybe the real prophets didn't want them either. Or maybe the biblical prophets didn't want the burden either. Who would?
Probably
he had his own little interesting.
Who would? Roy Cohn.
Yeah. Although he'd be serving his own purpose, he wouldn't be following.
Yeah, he'd be using it for. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I mean, one thing that I think was never really specifically told was whether Roy and Joe were ever involved in anything directly. Which I think that was interesting to kind of lead that as kind of a unstated message or not. I think Joe certainly enjoyed his time in Central Park in many ways, to just put it cleanly. But I don't necessarily. I'm suspect as to whether they actually had any personal connection beyond the business end, and Roy kind of buffeting Joe to kind of take advantage of his potential position in the Department of Justice to help him, of course. Kind of Roy using everyone in any way just to further his own advances.
I would say they weren't involved, but yes, it is ambiguous. But there is something about Roy that.
Yeah, I felt like.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say there is something about Roy
like
that.
Joe. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. This is a Zoom symptom.
It's a Zoom problem.
Yes, go ahead. All right. There is something about Roy that, he knows he's a prick, he knows it and he says it. And, he's willing to live with the consequences. And he thinks it's necessary, but, he doesn't think, oh, I'm a good person. So there's some degree, even though he's, in a lot of denial about his, his gender situation, he knows, he has some self-awareness regarding his own motives and his own actions. He's willing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would definitely agree that he had self-awareness, that he knew that what he was doing was all to serve self.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that Joe and Roy were involved directly or romantically. Like, maybe there was some tension there between them, but not in the sense. I think the interactions between Joe and Lewis, Joe seemed so tentative, and like it was very much clear that he was very inexperienced and very hesitant, and just really didn't seem like he had very much experience with other men. So yeah, I got the impression that obviously they interacted a lot with each other, so maybe there was some sort of attraction between them, but yeah, I don't think. And I also think Roy seems so career driven, he probably wouldn't mix business with pleasure in that way either.
Yeah.
Plus, he wanted to use Joe, for his own purposes, but I do think he had a kind of a father feeling towards him and wanted him to kind of follow in his footsteps, like a father would, like a son or something. I mean, I think there was something there. How about, the family at the end that Tim described? My recollection is that Joe wasn't part of that at the end. That's correct, right? And what do you think of that? I mean, his mother is there, but he's not. His mother is close to Lewis and Belize and Pryor, but Joe is not even there. I don't know. Why do you think that was, or is there a reason? I don't know.
Well, Lewis was really put off by the fact that Joe was friendly with Roy Cohn. I mean, that was something that he made him completely uncomfortable. So I think that maybe that sort of permeated it, what Joe was going to do with his life and how he was going to sort of maybe in some ways carry on. But I think that they were very much put off by the fact that he was friendly with Roy Cohn. And so that might have had something to do with why he wasn't there. He wasn't invited.
And he'd written those decisions, which were very, anti-gay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they could forgive him. Yeah.
I mean, there's that whole in mixed in with this is that whole kind of challenge of being gay, but also possibly being a Republican, which it's still a battle now in many ways, but I think it's a little bit probably of an easier battle in some ways now too. Not my personal feelings, but I still personally think that's somewhat of an issue, but I think it's a little more socially acceptable in some ways to have that happen. But then it was certainly seen as kind of selling your soul for the advances of career advancement or political advancement or what have you, which I think is very clear that did happen in many ways with Roy and others. So.
Yeah.
So Tim, do you think we should ask our guests if they have any questions or comments?
I think that totally makes a lot of sense. I know there was a comment out there, so if anyone has any questions, certainly feel free to unmute yourself. But I think we're going to treat this it's very informally, so feel free to jump in if you feel. Just obviously unmute yourself or just shoot a message to the chat. Suzanne.
I obviously don't know about the play. I'm not going to comment on that. But recently this year, there was a nonfiction book that came out that traced the Reagan White House and had a lot of information about the AIDS situation and the differences between the president and his wife, whose name is escaping me right now. What's
Nancy.
her name? Nancy. Yes. And different people who tried to influence them. She had many gay friends, and so it was a very complicated thing, especially for her. He was starting to be senile. There were all kinds of different dynamics going on. Did any of you see that? It deserves a play in its own right, I thought.
Well, what is the name of it?
I wish I knew. Maybe I can get it to the mayor and he can let you guys know. It was just an article in the New Yorker that was based on this book. So
It sounds fascinating.
yeah, and there were activists who were not gay, women with children whose children had gotten AIDS, and they were advocating so strongly, and they died before they acted, literally. So it was a pretty gut-wrenching effort on the inside that we've never known about before this reporting.
Well, there was a message. There's kind of a note about Nancy Reagan's kind of compassion in some ways, that saying that Roy could call up and get whatever he wanted and get AZT through the play. He at one point said, "I can dial 15 digits and get anything I want, and I can." And he was talking to his doctor, and his doctor said, "What, you can call the president?" He said, "No, someone better, his wife." So in which he could call and get anything, which I think that's how he got on this experimental treatment of the AZT. So I think kind of there's that message of what you had said was brought out in this in some way as well. So yeah, it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah. Rock Hudson also reached out. Mm-hmm. And there was arrangements made to fly him at one point, but at one point when he reached out, nothing, no answer. So all of those details about that sort of thing was explored in this article.
Yeah, my understanding of the Reagans was that at one point they did have I think both of them had some gay friends or acquaintances, and then as they began to strategize towards the evangelical political right, there was a very conscious choice to start distancing themselves from, because he had been an actor, so he knew people in Hollywood. He certainly had personal connections and friends, but they made a very conscious political choice to differentiate themselves and separate themselves very strongly from the gay community, which led to this very clear, decisive choice to not talk about the AIDS epidemic for years.
So which character did you like the best?
I liked Harper.
I think I like Belize the best.
Yeah, I like Belize too.
Yeah, I think Belize was I think probably the best well-rounded character in many ways. And just the ability to retort so quickly to anything and anyone. I think I admire that in Belize, which I kind of wish I sometimes.
Like if you're going to hang out with someone, at least for me, because Belize is so entertaining. Just constant, wordplay and everything.
Although Harper would be a trip.
Harper.
Yeah.
go along with one of her, little rides there with the Valium and just let her talk. Would be quite interesting.
Be her sober friend, make sure everything goes okay.
Yeah, you're the driver, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I see Paul like nodding. I'm just wondering if he wants to tell us who his favorite character was.
Thank you. I've kind of not known, but I've kind of seen too many people like Roy in real life. And it was kind of interesting how no matter what, he wouldn't change. There was no, rock solid the way he was right to the end. And I was expecting him to develop, not say develop, but, well, he did develop in a way, he didn't change. But I was expecting him to develop, at least move a little bit, somewhat, at least toward death, and not a bit. If anything, he got even more rigid. I was kind of thinking that, I'm just going to jot down a note here, acceptance and understanding. I kind of see that as a theme throughout the play, but I can't really distill or crystallize what. I see acceptance and understanding, or lack thereof. Belize, total understanding and acceptance, like maybe not just how you were saying how she or he rather, I believe it is, went to Roy and took care of him, even as despicable as he was. Yet Roy, on the other hand, being just the opposite, like not willing to bend one bit. So those kind of things pulling at each other throughout the whole second, last third of the play about or so was kind of interesting. Anyway, and I'm sure there's more of that in there too, acceptance or lack thereof.
Yeah, and Roy was just still focused on his disbarment hearing and maintaining his status as a lawyer, even in his deathbed, and focused on getting Ethel Rosenberg to quote unquote sing on his deathbed. That's what he was so focused on, probably through hallucinations in many ways, but certainly that's to his dying breath. That's the stuff that he focused on. So his lack of acceptance to change is certainly big there.
Yeah. I think Paul nailed it when he said he got more rigid as he got closer to his own end, and you would think that you would be more open, not knowing what was going to happen when you took your last breath. So yeah, it's I think a really excellent point.
Maybe you show your true colors as you're nearing that final board. So.
True. Yeah.
Right.
Another excellent point.
Yeah.
I think acceptance of oneself and also of relationships too. There were quite a few relationships between people where one or both characters were not capable of accepting the truth about the relationship. Like, I think it was difficult for Luis to accept that him walking away meant it was the end of the relationship. Even if he wanted to come back later, it wasn't an option anymore. That was difficult for him to accept. It was difficult for Hannah to accept that her son was gay, although it seems as if she maybe did. So yeah, I agree. I think acceptance is a major theme.
One thing that I found kind of interesting, and I've been somewhat slowly watching the 2003 thing on HBO Max recently, and just was before this saw a little bit of the scene where Joe and Harper were together, and Joe, the way they call it is when they wanted one to kiss each other, they always said buddy kiss. It wasn't necessarily anything romantic. It was always buddy. That was always what he called her as well. That's kind of an interesting little sign that, hey, this really is not a romantic relationship. So it was more of a buddy relationship.
Yeah, high five.
Exactly.
At least on Joe's end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts or observations that you have that maybe didn't make the list just yet, or anything from Suzanne or Paul or anyone else that might be on here that anything or you can feel free to message through the chat if you feel that way as well.
Well, I would like to just thank Tim and our panelists, Liz and Nicole, and all of you for joining us, because I think the rereading this and talking about it has been a really fun experience.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah,
Fair.
thanks all. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
And maybe we'll have a book club sometime in the future.
Awesome.
Can't say on
Okay.
what yet. But. All right. Anyway, good
Very
to
good.
see you all.
Okay, have a good night.